Y'all know what it is.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Eggs. Today's guest is Phil Strazzulla. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. Thrilled to death to have you. I was kind of excited. I was listening to some old podcasts and I heard that you were out in Cambridge, and I'm not from the Boston area, but I love the Boston area. And I worked out there for a client for 3 or 4 months. And so I got to live out there in the worst months to be in Boston, January till April. But, so it was pretty brutal. But at the same time, it's such a cool place. So is that where you're calling in from today?
Yeah, I'm just over the Charles River in Boston proper, but lived in Cambridge for quite some time. And yeah, unfortunately, we have like at least 4 worst months, I guess, of the year to visit. But otherwise, it's a great city. Anybody out there who hasn't been, definitely check out Boston, but do it in July, August when we have unbelievable weather and you can go do all the cool stuff that we've got from the history of the restaurants and all the
it was so nice actually
Harvard stuff.
Yeah, actually the last time I was out there was this past August. So that was the first time I had been in Boston during, summer and nice weather. And I'll second that. It was beautiful.
So Phil, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, where you come from, how you got to where you're at?
Sure. So I originally started my career off working in venture capital, doing early stage software investing at this firm called Bessemer Venture Partners. I always wanted to start my own business. And so I went to business school at Harvard Business School, which is how I ended up in Cambridge.
Nice.
Did my MBA, taught myself how to program, started working on a bunch of different things, one of which turned into a business, like sort of almost by accident, and ran that for a number of years and then hired somebody as a general manager to run that on a day-to-day basis about 4 years ago. Wanted to start another business. So I started this website called Select Software Reviews, where companies can figure out what HR tools to buy. We're sort of like NerdWallet or Wirecutter for HR technology. And then I spend about 10% of my time investing in things. So some angel investments, but more so like super random stuff like litigation finance in Latin America or secondary opportunities, niche media, like royalties and stuff like that, search funds, all sorts of different businesses.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Are you would you sort of characterize yourself as having been always entrepreneurial? Like, was that something that you, I don't know, were led into, or, what did your entrepreneurial journey look like?
I think I always did have an interest in it. I actually was more interested in finance. So I started investing in the stock market when I was 12.
Nice.
My brother is a year younger than me. And it was during the 90s. And like every headline was like, IPO goes up 100%. And I was like, oh, that sounds like easy money. And when I was in first grade, I remember I opened up a bank account, and that was when savings account interest rates were 5%, which maybe we'll be back there soon enough. But this idea that like for every $100 that you put in this thing, you get $5 a year for free was like unbelievable to me. And then the stock market was like that on steroids. So we convinced our mom to take us to Fidelity. We opened brokerage accounts. I still have my Fidelity brokerage account 20 some odd years later. Wow. And I had, a lawn mowing business, and I taught sailing and did a bunch of other random stuff like traded baseball cards and whatnot to make money. And then I would put a lot of that just into stocks, and was lucky to listen to Warren Buffett when he said it was overvalued in 1999, got to cash. And then I was really lucky in 2007 to listen to Steve Eisenman and get out of the market then too. So yeah, it's been a fun journey.
So, as a 12-year-old, having that foresight and being able to A, know what stocks are, and B, know how to manage your finances, that's incredible. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say your dad worked in the finance world and had, or your parents in general just had good financial literacy to be able to teach you as a young child these things. It's most people. I remember when I was 12, banking was the last thing on my mind. Going out and causing problems was more in my realm. So, is that kind of how you got that? Was from your parents?
I think it was. So my dad's a doctor, but he grew up very poor, and he started trading stocks when he was like around the same age, like 10, 12.
Wow.
And he was just always like focused on like how much money can I make to sort of like have control over my life. And I probably was somewhat inspired by that story. And we just had a natural interest. Like, I think if, probably 99% of 12-year-olds, if you're like, hey, I'm going to take you to Fidelity, they'd be like, I don't want to go. I want to play soccer.
Exactly.
And we played soccer too. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like 99% of my time or anything like that, but I still love investing. My brother's a professional investor. Like, we just sort of had something about our DNA that made us drawn to it. And then we just started, we did it on our own. We read Worth magazine, we'd read the Wall Street Journal, we'd pick stocks. I got to go to this like thing in 7th grade at MIT. They just mapped the human genome for the first time. And I did well on like the SATs. Like, sometimes you take the SATs in like 6th grade. And if you did well enough, you got to go to this thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to invest in some genomics companies. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But like we invested in a couple of genomics companies, and like they increased. I remember one day, like one of them increased like 400%.
Wow.
And I think I made like $1,000. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, this is absolutely insane. And when you're 12 and you make $1,000, like it perks your ears up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'm so jealous of that upbringing. I mean, my mother, who raised me, has become much more financially literate over the years. But when I was a kid, there just was no emphasis on that kind of stuff. And I actually was the opposite, and still kind of am to some degree. I'm constantly fighting it, where every dollar in is burned. Like how can I spend that as quick as possible? And now I have kids of my own, and my 16-year-old, this is something we've been going back and forth with him, which is this. He doesn't really have an interest like what you're describing, but we've been talking about setting up with a brokerage account or something. I mean, I'm a little too old to make up much ground on compounding, but he's young enough that he really could compound some stuff. And I like that little eyebrow shake. I like that. Maybe I'm wrong. I like that idea. But my impression is that it would be a good idea to get our kids started on some early accounts. Just to put some money away, and then have maybe there be some money one day when they're older.
Yeah. I don't think you're ever too old, unless you're, in your 70s maybe, but like even so every 30 years that you invest at 6%, you basically make a 5x. So if you're 30, by the time you're 60, you're going to have a 5x on whatever you've got now, plus everything else you contribute to it. And then when you're 90, you'll have another 5x on that. So you have a 25x from what you have today that you can leave your kids. So why, I don't think it's really ever too late. And maybe you get lucky and you start investing when the market's down, and you make an 8%. And all of a sudden that 5x, I don't know what the math works out to. Maybe it's like a 7 or 8x. So 8 times 8, that's a 64x. So if you can invest 10K today, you're going to leave 640K to your kids when you pass away, if you make it to 90. So I don't think it's too late. But in terms of like, educating your kids on this stuff, I think you got to take it slow unless they have some sort of innate desire. I got really lucky to talk to this guy that runs a super successful hedge fund. He's kind of famous, and he promised me I wouldn't ever reveal his name, but I read his book and I emailed him and I was like, hey, I read your book, thought it was amazing. Can I have dinner with you? And he said yes. And then later he was like, why don't we just do a phone call? I don't know who the hell you are. And one of the things he said, I very much have like a value investor mentality. Like, I'm sort of the opposite of you, where like every dollar I have, I'm like, how can I protect this money? Like, how can I take the subway instead of an Uber? Or how can I buy, this at Uniqlo versus at Banana Republic or whatever. And he's sort of the same way. And we started talking about like value, like why is it obvious to some people when this asset that's worth $1 is trading for 50 cents and vice versa? And he believes it's just an innate thing. Like either you sort of like think that way and there's something weird about like the way your brain's set up, or you don't. And I think it's hard if you're not interested in something to force it.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And and I've seen that in my boys. Unfortunately, they seem to take after me, which is every time they get $1, they spend $1. And, or worse, every time they get $1, they spend $1.50, and 50 cents of that is mine. And so it's even worse. And so we're talking a little bit now about how to control it. And, I've been doing a lot of work on becoming more financially literate as I've gotten older. And so hopefully we can impart some wisdom on these boys, but yeah, I don't know, but I think you're right. My stepfather and my stepbrother are more that way, more the way you've described, where it's this sort of innate thing. And they're much more that way than our family is, unfortunately. So anyway. But let's get back into your entrepreneurial journey a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about that first organization that you started and how that came to be. So you went to Harvard Business School, but then you became a programmer. How did you then, go? So you went into the field of doing web development or programming, and then you built the business around it. So can we talk a little bit about that organization and how that's set up?
And actually, let's talk about, did you develop it yourself, or did you learn programming so that you could oversee other developers?
Yeah, so I explicitly learned programming to start a business so I could build something myself and wouldn't have to be reliant on other people. I came from the world of venture capital, and I just saw many times that people would get a business to a decent scale, let's say 5 million of revenue, and let's say your business is worth $30 million, but your VC is like, well, I want to go for $100 million outcome, so I'm not going to let you sell it. Or maybe you've raised $30 million, and so your equity is worth zero or whatever. And so I was like, I really want to start something that I own 100% of. And so the only way to do that is to know how to do everything around this business. So I started teaching myself how to program and just working on different projects. And after graduation, I actually never worked as a computer programmer. I just started a business at that point. It had gotten to the point where it actually was a business. And I raised $25,000 from this like student venture fund called Dorm Room Fund, which is for first round capital. And that was sort of enough to get me to the next step. And then we raised another couple $100,000 angel fund. And then we got a bunch of customers and kind of had like enough revenue to support myself and my co-founder, who I recruited, friend of mine, to become our CTO, who was more of a programmer than I was. I'm proud to say, like, I built something from scratch, from like literally pressing like file new, that we sold to Nissan and Dropbox and Monster.com. So like real companies that were paying us like real amounts of money for this software that I just like, come up with the idea and wrote from scratch. But at the end of the day, we really need somebody else to take it to the next level.
So this was the HR software, correct?
Yeah, exactly. We basically, at that point, like companies were really struggling with Glassdoor. Sure. A lot of employees were going on there who got fired and were like, hey, like this place sucks. Like, don't believe anything they say. And so we were giving companies a way to generate lots of employee stories to have a more representative view of what's it actually like to work at a business versus just the guy that got fired.
Oh, that's really a cool idea, because I have been down the Glassdoor, rabbit hole of trying to see what a company's all about. And A, I don't like their program at all. And B, it's all negative because it's all people leaving bad reviews. And so if that's what your product was actual real reviews from current employees, I think that's really a good idea.
Thanks.
Yeah.
The average
to like sort of what drove that in you? Like why, how did you observe the problem that this HR thing is an issue? Like, did you see it through your own experience at Glassdoor and you thought, hey, I could make this better? Or where did that thought process come from?
So I was really interested in career paths. At business school, there's a lot of time for reflection, and everybody's like, I used to work at McKinsey and now I want to work in private equity or whatever. And it was sort of like, how does somebody, like, what do people do after business school? What do they do 5, 10, 15 years? And what does that look like? And so I started aggregating this information. And then I was sort of stumbled upon this problem by just talking to a lot of CEOs and HR leaders who were like, these stories are actually really good marketing collateral for us. Like, it's not, the value really isn't in the individual understanding how to become a VP of sales. It's more in the individual understanding, do you want to work in the sales team for our organization? And so that's sort of the path that I went down. And then I was like, oh, and the reason they want to do this is because there's this Glassdoor counterweight where the average review on Glassdoor is like a 3.2 versus like Uber, where everybody rates your Uber driver and the average rating is like 4.7. So it's sort of artificially low. Companies want to combat that. And I'm interested in career pathing. Let's take these stories to build your employer brand, basically.
Like that. So I just got hired. I've been self-employed for a long time. I'm in the process of getting hired with a new company, and HR is a part of the picture now. And I I haven't had to deal with an HR department, do drug tests, any of the fun stuff that comes with HR. And one of your talking points, and based off of your software here, is what are the hottest topics in HR? Can you maybe go over a few of them, some points and things that people might not think about when dealing with HR?
Yeah, I think most people's experience with HR is Toby from The Office. Like, still, many HR teams are just like the pencil pushers. Make sure you get healthcare, payroll, stuff like that. And then if somebody harasses you at work, they come in and deal with it, usually in not like maybe the best way possible. And so it's kind of funny because like when you meet people invariably ask, "What do you do?" And I say something about HR, and most people are like, "I hate my HR person." Like, let me rant about that for a while. And I'm like, okay, cool. Good to meet you. But to answer your question, there's actually a lot of interesting stuff happening in HR. Like, if you think about the most advanced organizations in the world, like Google or Stripe or McKinsey or Goldman, they understand that like people are everything. And so they actually have like really, really high powered HR teams that are making sure they hire the right people. So there's like tons of like science around what are the traits that make a really good XYZ person, and how do we understand whether or not this person has those traits. And they could be skills, they could be behavioral patterns. Some of this stuff's innate, like the stuff we were talking about earlier around like, do you care about investing or not? Some of it's learned. So there's a lot of stuff like that. It's making sure that like you have the right, onboarding and whatnot. But the really hottest topics are, how do you leverage artificial intelligence to source, evaluate talent? And then how do you use data to better understand your organization? So people analytics can tell you, hey, like, the VP of sales is a really phenomenal mentor to women. And the women account execs underneath this person get promoted faster than any other part of the organization. Let's understand what this person is doing so that we can replicate it. Hey, a really good salesperson is somebody that connects with their point of contact in customer success at least once a week and responds within 25 minutes to a marketing email. And we know that through all the analytics by looking at the top quartile of account executives. So there's all this like kind of interesting stuff that you can now do in the world of HR. And it's very much becoming like a strategic thing versus like, does somebody have health insurance?
Is this all data and analytics that you can track through your software?
No, not through our software. So my business right now is it's really a research website where people can go on and understand, okay, I care about people analytics. What are the top vendors? How much should I pay for this? What questions should I ask on demos? How do I get my boss to give me the budget? How do I make sure this is the right solution for me? That's what my current business does. And the previous business was very much focused on the employer branding issue.
Nice.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder, what's your perspective on this sort of trend in HR, this using of data and analytics? It's the obvious solution given just what's happening in technology and all that stuff. We do this for products and shopping and, we use this kind of information for everything, but it almost feels sort of a little bit anti-human, right? Because you're taking the human out of it. You're allowing the algorithm to make some decisions for you, or at least guide you in a path. What is your take on this, and how do you think this progresses?
It's really weird, right? Because like it's human beings, and the artificial intelligence aspects of things. It's like, why would a robot tell me whether or not I can do a job? And so it sort of has to be like a human assist, in my opinion. But if you look at how much it can assist somebody, it's pretty spectacular. So there's a technology now where a typical, recruiter has to spend hours every single day, like reaching out to candidates, talking to them, understanding if they're a good fit, scheduling interviews with them. There's literally a technology now where you can just send it your open job description. They'll find a bunch of people on the internet who fit the requirements. They'll email those people. They'll tell them about the job. They'll ask them some basic questions about is this the right fit for you? Are you looking for a job, right salary, etc.? And then if all goes well, they'll put it on the recruiter's calendar. So that recruiter who maybe could only hire like 2 or 3 people a month can now hire 10 or 15 people a month. And the candidate is not getting spammed by a human who can't keep up with inbox, who isn't very good at scheduling, who isn't going to be able to answer their questions about salary, et cetera. They're getting a much better experience. So in a lot of these things, it is better, but you got to be really careful. Like I think some of the stuff that Amazon's doing with like monitoring their drivers and like automatically firing people is like, it's a little messed up.
Yeah, like maybe that's this taken to a bad degree or something. So because I mean, I think you're right. I mean, obviously, I mean, people and technology is the future, right? I mean, this is what we're doing, and we're trying to figure out things. So I think it makes sense to me that it needs to sort of be hand in glove, right? And I guess it's maybe a balance to figure out how much you leverage the technology versus how much you should be allowed to leverage. I don't know, maybe your innate ability as an HR person, as a hiring professional or whatever.
Yeah. And there's even countries that are enacting laws around this stuff. Like, what can an AI do or not in the hiring process? And we actually run a job board as part of our business for HR people. So we have a bunch of like HR open recs, and we have a Slack group for people who are looking for jobs. And so we've got people in there every single day, like posting questions, and we've all been through a tough like job search process. Like I got laid off in the last recession, and I, for a year, looked for a new role, and it can be really devastating. And it's even worse if you're like, I can't even get an interview because these applicant tracking systems like don't like my resume, and I have no idea why. Like that's really brutal.
We actually, right before this call, like 30 minutes before, we interviewed a technical recruiter and asked him questions about ATS scanning and resumes and all this stuff. And pretty much what we came to a conclusion of is that, yes, your resume is important, but networking is more important. Actually getting in and meeting the person and connecting with the actual hiring manager is more important than actually submitting 1,000 resumes and hoping to get one reply.
Yeah, you can always differentiate yourself and put the ball in your hands. And as somebody who's like hired a lot of people, especially in the last year, like the bar for differentiation as a candidate is quite low. Most candidates are sending in like really terrible applications. And if you reach out, like a lot of people we've hired are people that reached out to us, like non-obvious candidates, but they're like, hey, Phil, like I saw you're the CEO of this company. Here's why I want to work here. Here's why I'd be a great fit. I know I've got these 3 weaknesses, but I'm willing to work to overcome it. And those are the people hands down that are the best people because they do work to overcome their weaknesses.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, I was just going to ask. So, I mean, with all this technology and everything, I wonder, is there like an older cohort of potential employees that might be left behind in this stuff? Like, for exactly the reason that you just mentioned, maybe they've written a resume. It's the same resume they've been kicking around for 25 years. And it's, they don't understand that there's, screening software or web applications you can use that'll review your stuff. And like, maybe they're just missing out on the technological piece. Like, I mean, is there a whole tranche of people who are going to just be sort of left in the dust with this kind of technology, do you think?
There could be, but this is going to happen every 3 to 5 years. And if you're not keeping up like the three of us, like if we don't learn new stuff over the next 3 to 5 years, like we're all extremely unemployable. And so it's not, and it's harder for, if you're in your like 60s and like you didn't really grow up with computers and stuff like that generation, I think it is harder because you never had that foundational level. But anybody in the workforce, if you don't keep up with stuff, like you're not going to be the person that people want to hire.
It's funny. My dad works for the state, and he's a safety inspector, and he's always been the guy on the job site going in person, trying to meet with the people and do walkthroughs and all this stuff. And they just hired a new person who is his boss, and they're wanting digital reports and digital stuff, this and that. And I can see my dad has a real hard time with it. And so, staying relevant and staying on top of the current tech is really important. I know that there's tech out there now to help engineers do a walkthrough of a job site and see where things are going to sit and how this is going to look. And it's, if you don't stay in touch with what's actually happening in your industry, you're going to get phased out real quick. So one of the talking points that is on your little bio that we have for you is work-life balance in a remote world. I'm sure you hire a lot of remote workers and have worked remote yourself. Can you talk about work-life balance while working remotely for us?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things that played out in the pandemic is a lot of people got super burnt out because they were checking their emails at 10 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning. And like, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
There's a couple of great books about this. One is Deep Work.
About Newport. Yeah.
Exactly. And like one of his big things is like disconnection, right? Like weekends, like don't do anything. So your brain can recharge. And there's another really good book by the Acceleration Partners guy, Bob Glazer. I forget exactly the name of it, but it's a remote first company. It's been remote first for like 10 years. And so they figured out all these things. And some of the core tips are, one, have a routine to start and end your day so that your body and your mind sort of knows like, hey, I'm going to work. And it could be taking a shower. It could be having a cup of coffee at the end of the day. Maybe it's a wind down. You start to make dinner. You go for a walk. You call your friend, whatever it is. Have a physical space in your home that is for work. So that could be a chair in your kitchen. If you don't have an office, it could be an office, obviously. And then really disconnect. After you're done, you're done. Don't keep checking emails. Don't check Slack. And set those norms for yourself so that you can maintain your sanity. And really, it's on managers, right? Like we have a communication protocol document in our company because, one, I want to encourage people to do deep work. And two, I don't want somebody to be super frustrated because they Slack somebody and it's 3 days later and they're not getting a response. So I think it's just incumbent upon leadership, as is the solution for many problems in organizations, to set the right precedents so that people know what to do.
Yeah.
How much too, just to sort of dovetail off of that, how much do you think it's the company's role to manage these sort of norms for people, versus allowing people the latitude to do it themselves? And, the only reason I ask, I actually think it's really interesting that you said a routine to start and end your day. I've been espousing the routine thing for a million years, but that idea of ending your day on a routine is really interesting to me too. But like, I've never relied, I guess, on an employer to put things in place for me to do that, right? Like it's always just been something I've managed on my own. And so I wonder, do you have a thought around, who should be in charge?
I think that it should be leadership, because otherwise, and hopefully it's like a benevolent sort of leadership, the whole like benevolent dictator thing. Otherwise it could be, terrible. But if you're an individual, you're going to have something different than somebody else. And it's going to be super frustrating because nobody knows what is standard and what's not. And individuals, as we saw, have a tendency to overwork and not think too much about answering another 3 or 4 emails before they go to bed, when that's actually really detrimental to your mental health and your overall performance. So, for me, like obviously, I'm the boss. Like I love it if my employees worked harder, but I also want to create a culture that retains talent and allows people to be very effective. And those two are trade-offs.
Yeah. I have a nightly routine of turning the TV on and falling asleep to it, which is probably the worst thing I could do. And I like the thought of having something, like make a thing of tea or something, just to get your routine going to where it's bedtime, shut your brain off, go to sleep. Do you meditate? Have you ever done that? Does it help with your work-life balance?
Yeah, I try to meditate at least 3 times a week, hopefully more than that. And it's huge. Like myself, like many others who have like a high need for achievement personality, have a lot of anxiety. And I think like the purpose of anxiety is to like make you do stuff. And like, how do you get rid of it? You like, achieve something and you feel really good and you strike things off your to-do list. But like, anxiety is not like a great thing to live with day to day. So I meditate, and it helps a lot. That and exercise help a tremendous amount. And I recommend it to everybody. And I always think if I had 30 seconds with like a 15-year-old Phil, like what would I tell him? And it would be just meditate as much as you can. It's really going to help you.
Do you tend to do that in the mornings, or do you do it just whenever you feel stressed?
I sprinkle it in whenever I have time. So it's recommended to do in the morning. It's actually recommended not to do it at night because it can disrupt your sleep.
Oh, really?
Probably not as bad as leaving the TV on. But yeah, there was some study recently that I think specifically transcendental meditation 2 hours before bed actually disrupts your sleep. These studies, like who the heck knows like what's actually real or not, but yeah, I just do it during the day whenever I have time.
Like that.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting too, and maybe this is kind of a recurring theme or a topic to talk about, is this idea of sort of I don't necessarily want to say like mindfulness, but this slowing down of things to actually become more effective, right? I mean, taking the time to meditate, you know, or forcing ourselves to have boundaries around starting and stopping work, for example. Like it seems that there's something in that realm where it's almost a little bit counterintuitive. And so maybe this is a good topic for leaders, which is this idea that, you know, even though the impulse is to work harder, stay longer, all that stuff. And maybe this is an old thing, right? Maybe I'm showing my age with that idea, but, you know, but maybe just this idea of slowing things down and, you know, pacing yourself is actually the better way to go. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's certainly the right way to go, especially for leadership. If your job is to like stamp out widgets, then like stamp out the widgets. But if your job involves any sort of thinking, then you could just run really hard in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And I found that with myself. I found that with my employees, our business. And so, you know, one of my biggest jobs as a CEO is to point people in the right direction and make sure they're running that way. We actually started this new thing. Have you guys ever heard of FocusMate? The app. So it's a little weird, but like they match you up with somebody over Zoom and you work with them for 45 minutes.
I like that.
And so the first minute you say like, here's what I'm going to do. What are you going to get done? You put it in the chat, and it's almost like this social contract. And then you leave the video on. You can leave audio on if you want. And then at the end you say, hey, what'd you get done? And it's like, well, I actually didn't get this done or whatever, but those are like the most productive 45 minutes of my life. Like I feel like I'm on like tons of Adderall or something like that. Like it's just crazy. And I started doing those with my team. And at the end of it, it's like, hey, what did you do? And if you're doing it on FocusMate, the app, you just sign off and that's it. But with a teammate, it's like, oh, okay, well, why did you do it this way? Why did it take you an hour to do this? Like, what's your process there? And, you know, I found, unfortunately, things that my colleagues are doing extremely inefficiently that, man, if somehow they come to a different conclusion, it would have saved them like 30, 40% of their time over the last year. So you've got to have that time away. The other interesting thing that I read recently is that there was a study where they asked athletes to do the thing that they do at 80% capacity. So you kick a soccer ball, swing a golf club, hit a baseball, whatever. They said, do it at 80% capacity. And almost all of them kicked the ball further, hit the ball harder, swung the golf club and hit the ball further. And it's basically because of like biomechanics. So if you try really, really hard to like swing a baseball bat, you're not using like all your body's like natural sort of like whip effects, which can be really, really powerful. And so like, it's counterintuitive, but like, I think this idea is super right.
You look at like a professional golfer, for example, and you look at their swing, it just looks so natural and effortless and the ball just takes off. And that makes complete sense because it's the natural fluid movement and the force and energy that's built up in the club because of that. So that does make complete sense. Yeah.
It's like, if you have all this like stress, sort of energy and
tension.
And you're like, I got to do this, this, and this, and this at work. Or if you're like, I got to swing this golf club as hard as I can, you're not allowing yourself to do it in the most efficient way.
Yeah.
Whether it's the mental work or the physical work, you're going to hurt yourself because of it.
There's
Well, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, even if you think about like driving a car, right? I mean, like, yes, okay, you can pin it at 90 and maybe you're going to get there, I don't know, 10 minutes, 10 miles per hour faster, but you're going to burn twice as much fuel. Like there's some efficiencies, right, where you start to run out. And so it makes a lot of sense that finding that sweet spot. And it might be challenging to find that sweet spot, but it seems that it makes sense to pursue it.
I was actually going to use another example there of in a car. They've done studies on people that can see an accident's forthcoming and they tense up, and it actually causes more problems physically in the accident because they're tense. And the people that just get blinds, just out of the blue randomly get hit, their body's loose, and it causes less damage to their overall environment when they get in an accident. So I also
something similar with like drunk drivers, for example, that they tend to survive those kinds of accidents because they're loose and don't tighten up. And so no, it makes sense. Not to say that everybody should do everything under alcohol, but it might slow things down that 20%.
I was gonna say your pair work, that app sounds really neat. And there's something about having someone on the other side of the call that's working and keeping you kind of motivated to get as much done as you can, that like in software, pair development, you're working on the same app. There's what's it called? What is it called? It's I use it all the time. Visual Studio Code. You can actually do pair codings where you can see what they're working on and what you're working on, and you can make adjustments or notes or this and that. And with a Zoom call and the ability to interact, it really helps you go further. Ryan's worked in the past with Pomodoros, setting like a 45-minute timer.
That's almost like the self-motivated version of this is doing it on your own schedule. But I love that social component. That seems like such an interesting idea.
Yeah.
So I want to go into, you've mentioned that you're scaling your business. You're in the middle of growing this operation. Obviously, HR is a piece of your day. Can you talk a little bit about making good hiring decisions and how you identify the types of people that you want to bring to work?
Something I've thought about a lot. And what's crazy is like the interview process is just so terrible and broken.
Yeah.
And it has like almost no signal. Like Google, I think, has done the most studies around this, and they basically we don't know how to identify good talent. Like it's not GPA, it's not how you do in the interviews. Like some people do really, really well here and some people don't. And like it doesn't correlate with anything, which is kind of scary. But what I try to do is I try to make it a mutual fit. So I'm just like on our career page, I'm like, here are all the reasons you'd hate working here. One, okay, we're a remote team. Like some people don't like working remote. I hired a guy that he wrote a song about how much he hated working remote. So, that obviously didn't work out too well. We're an international team. Like we have people who are very religious and atheists. We have people who are liberals and conservatives. We have people like all sorts of different stuff, right? And some people don't want to deal with that. Some people aren't open-minded. There's just like a bunch of stuff that like is weird about our team. We're a small team. We're a startup. Things change. So I think that's a big part of it. The other is just trying to identify like what are the three core skills for this role, and how do I try to figure them out in the interview process. So like attention to detail or analytical mindset or written communication, and then do a project and see how they do. And what I found is that somebody told me about online dating like years ago. They were like, if somebody in their online dating profile looks like they, I don't know, have big ears, like in person, they're going to have like the biggest ears you've ever seen in your life. And I feel like that's the same with the interview process. If somebody's like, doesn't have the best grammar in the interview process, they basically can't string a sentence together in real life when you actually work with them. So you just have to identify those things and say, hey, can I live with this or not? And do I want to give this person a shot or not? Because some of our hires, honestly, I'm kind of like, I don't know if this is going to work out, but I'm willing to give them a shot, and I just be transparent about expectations. What does good look like, and support them. And most people will work out.
Yeah. Well, and it's so critical, especially in the startup environment, as you're trying to build a business. And I mean, every hire is so critical, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's, one more cog when you have 10,000 cogs, maybe isn't that big a deal. But one guy when you have 7 guys is a big deal. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's actually interesting because I've been sort of going through a vetting process with a new technology company that is interested in having me work with them. And this has been one of the things that we've been going back and forth on, right? Like I'll basically be the 7th hire. And it's like I'm coming in kind of late. They've already started on some development, all these things. And so like we're trying to scope out, the personality feels, we're trying to get the, technology feels, we're trying to understand how everybody works. But like we've been doing this for months, like honestly, and this guy's a former client. I've worked with him over years, but I mean, so it was a really slow burn getting there. So maybe that's not how every business needs to hire. But the point I'm trying to make is that, these, especially these foundational roles are so critical for a startup that you can't make a mistake, or at least if you do, you got to be able to move quickly.
Yeah. And we also have an arduous hiring process. And part of that's because I used to work in finance and like, my job in venture capital, I had 43 interviews for that job,
Wow.
and so for me, like doing a 3-round interview process, I'm kind of like, this is easy, right? Like, but in our last person we just hired, we had 2 guys who were the finalists, both named Sean, and we hired one Sean, the other Sean we didn't hire. And he was upset. He was like, this was a long interview process. I did a lot of work for it. And the only thing I could say was we were upfront about it. We told you exactly what the process would be. We tried to make it as easy as possible, but at the end of the day, we just want to try to hire the right person. And, that's just, it is what it is. And it's too bad that it didn't work out.
So you mentioned it's a 3-step process. Do you mind going a little bit into depth on what those steps are and how you vet people?
Yeah, so we use a tool called Verbo to do usually like a light skills assessment. So we'll have like 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll usually have a video component to that. And we only invite like 10% of applicants to do that. Like people that it's like, I can see that this person working out. Maybe they sent us a great cover letter. Maybe they reached out to me directly. Maybe they have a great resume. After that, we usually take 50% of those people and talk to them. Phone screen, just like, hey, here's what the job is, blah, blah, blah. Then we'll do a project with them. So the project is designed to be 90 minutes of their work. And then we come together and we talk about the project, like, how'd you do it? Let's look at the deliverable, et cetera. Try to give them feedback, see if they can then internalize feedback. And then they usually meet with one other person on the team who they'll work with or who maybe has a similar background to them. So, if you live in Europe, maybe you talk to somebody that lives in Europe or something like that. So that's the process.
Are most of your hires in tech? Is that most of what you're?
Most are editorial, actually. So
really?
Editorial and marketing. Yeah, because our business, we really have a media business. Like it's on the internet. We have a website. We actually have some proprietary software that we built to manage our monetization. But the majority of what we do is just like getting the right information in people's hands. So that's very much media.
Okay. Yeah,
it's interesting. I wanted to go back to something you said earlier, and it was a little offhanded, but I wanted to dig into your sort of philosophy of leadership for a minute. You mentioned this idea that the role of the CEO, or at least your position as CEO, is to sort of just steer people in the right direction and make sure that everybody's sort of pointing the same direction. And I've heard stuff sort of similar like this from other CEOs, but I wondered if you'd just talk a little bit about sort of your leadership style and how, what the role of the CEO is in your situation. I know for a lot of people, especially young people, when they hear CEO, it's I don't know, almost like the dictator or the king, right? I mean, like I run the organization, but I think the newer philosophy or the more modern philosophy is kind of what you described, this idea of sort of, you're more of a coach. It's not about being the best person in the room. It's about helping everybody else be their best, that kind of thing. And so I wonder if you just talk a little bit about how you've evolved your leadership style over the years through your first organization and now to what you're doing today. And how much of that was, formal education and how much was just on the job learning?
Yeah, I would say to describe it, it's an evolution and it's changing every week. I'm trying to align everybody in a way that feels very collaborative. while also getting us to the right answer quickly, and then helping people achieve their own individual goals, which align with the company goals. So that's one-on-one coaching. It's looking at work product. It's being available to answer questions. It's offering positive reinforcement and publicly, as well as critical feedback, and trying to do that in the right way, and trying to encourage people to take feedback and not take it personally. And so that's a lot of it's like building relationship with people and knowing like what's going on in their lives, and building them up so that you can also be like, well, you messed these 3 things up too. And here's how I would have done it differently. And, like there's somebody in our team that like keeps messing up the same thing. And it's just like, here's what's wrong with this version of it. Here's what's wrong with this version of it. Not in a way that's like, and you're an idiot or what's wrong with you or whatever, but trying to have empathy and sort of have like the most favorable interpretation of what they're doing. Not like, hey, you're lazy, you're careless, but hey, like this is hard. Like, let's figure out how to make a better process around it. So really trying to align with people and internalize the mentality of like, my job is to make everybody the best version of themselves. And then what happens is people are like, wow, this is really great. I like working here. I want to help this company grow, and we also have economic incentives to do that as well. So we all have kind of like a profit sharing that gets paid out quarterly based on how the company does. So we're all aligned there.
Nice. Yeah. And is that something you think that's unique to sort of this size of organization, where basically you've got people coming in, but like they, I guess, are more aligned with the organization itself versus, again, back to the example of, employee 10,001, like, the person who's employee 14 might have a little bit more buy-in or care a little bit more about the future of the organization. Like, is that something you're observing?
You definitely get more people like that, more like the missionaries versus the mercenaries at this stage of business. It's, there are companies that I think have strong brands, and I'm really talking about employer brands that people are like, I'm so proud that, like, I feel like Nike is one of those companies where, like, if you talk to people that work in the Oregon office, like, they just love working for Nike, and that's a big part of their self-identity, and they push themselves to help the organization move forward. But many times, like us, when we're 500 people are going to come in and be like, hey, this is a great opportunity, make some money, learn some stuff, get promoted, or move to another company. Like, that's probably how most people are going to think about it. I hope not, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe we can figure out how to keep getting these missionaries in there. But I think you're right.
Yeah, I've been listening to this audiobook, How Google Works, and it kind of breaks down their business structure and their practices that they do as a business. And one of them is they limit the size of their teams. I think they call it a two pizza.
Oh yeah,
you got to be able to feed your entire team with 2 pizzas, and if it's more than that, then you got to start making adjustments. Can you maybe go down your organization, how it's structured, and things that you do in particular to manage managing 500 people's a large task. You obviously can't do it yourself. Can you maybe go down your structure and how it works?
Yeah, and we're more like 30. I'm saying when we get to 500, but
okay. Right.
Yeah. So it's, our team is pretty small. We've got a couple of folks in leadership, and then we've got a few people underneath each of them. So nobody has more than like 4 or 5 direct reports.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's fairly easy at this point. And we still do like, Thursdays we do like hangout on Zoom where we'll do trivia or we'll like do something fun together. Everybody knows each other. When somebody's starting on Monday, everybody will have a one-on-one with that person to just be like, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. Now, when we grow another 50 or 60%, like that's probably not going to happen. And I think we'll have to figure that out.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you had 500.
Yeah, no worries.
So I wanted to go back to just the component about sort of formal education versus on-the-job training as it pertains to leadership. Like, obviously you come from a highly pedigreed background. Not everybody will have that sort of access, but I think there's a lot of people who sort of put off leadership or put off entrepreneurship because they, either don't feel like they have the training or they don't have the knowledge or they don't have the whatever. Can you talk about, and maybe I mean I don't know anything about the Harvard MBA, but I assume that that comes with some leverage that can help in business. But I wonder if you wouldn't just talk about sort of how that prepared you to do the work you're doing today versus how much of this you've just had to sort of scrape together on your way.
I think that it's hard to go through that program and not learn a lot because it's a very diverse group of people. So you got people who are ex-Navy SEALs, you get people who ran their own businesses, people from all over the world, and you get to learn from those people. And you get to kind of like at a subconscious level, just like pick up on like, how do they talk about themselves or how do they interact with others? And you just learn a ton. I think that most of the stuff that you're doing in your job, you're learning. Like 99% of the stuff that I do in my job, I didn't learn in my MBA program or anywhere else. I just learned by doing it.
Yeah.
And I feel like Y Combinator is like one of the best proof points of that, where, you're just taking a bunch of engineers who they're smart, but they don't know anything about business. Like that's the whole point of it. And you're not doing too much coaching. You're just like really encouraging them, giving them a bit of money. And then they're building like Airbnb and Stripe and Dropbox and all these unbelievable businesses. And it sort of gets back to the point around like, what about these people who can't keep up with technology? It's the same with anything. Like if you can't keep up with the changing culture and how you should manage teams, or the changing like best practices around anything, you're done. So everything is new and learned on the job. I would say the HBS MBA, it gives you an unbelievable network. It gives you some self-confidence. It gives you credibility to do stuff when you walk into a room and people are like, oh, wow, you've got that stamp of approval. And you do learn a lot and it's a good launching pad, but I wouldn't say like the specific skills outside of a few that I learned in the classroom, I'm like using.
Yeah. Well, and that's sort of what I assume, especially as it pertains to technology businesses and things like that, right? I mean, so much of the industry is evolving as we go. Yeah. And, but I hear people, and you sort of alluded to this a little bit as you were talking about the early days of your business, which was, fundraising and then, doing these different rounds of investment and all these things. Like this is a very tech forward way of running organizations. And like, I still am trying to figure out where people pick it up. Like, if they just learn it from somebody they worked for or what, but it's like, how do you know how to put your foot forward, or what's next, if you've never been through that route. And so, I mean, it doesn't sound like those are things you picked up in the MBA specifically, but I probably through this continuing education or, learning what's happening in the industry is how you picked up a lot of that.
Yeah. Or even just from Twitter or Hacker News, like reading, like I probably spend like 30 minutes a day, just like reading passively, like, what did this CEO do? What did this person do to build that business? Listen to a podcast about somebody else's story, and then try to build a network of like 4 or 5 people who you think are smart, who care about you, and ask them questions and hopefully help them too. That's kind of how you're going to figure it out.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, I mean, like, I mentioned I was maybe starting to collaborate with this tech venture, and this is the thing, right? We're pre-seed right now. We'll be, raising that first round here pretty quick. And then, getting into series A's and B's and so on as we go, so listening to these guys who are all, multiple tech founders and exiters, they already have all that experience, but now here I am coming through it. And I've always run my business in a much more traditional way. And, it's a service-based industry or service-based business. And we've always just done our thing, but this new tech venture is helping me learn all this stuff. Right. And it's certainly not my formal education that got me there.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned podcasts. There's a few that I listen to. One's called the Prof G podcast with Scott Galloway. I was wondering what you listen to. Are there any that stand out to you?
I really like the podcast Invest Like the Best with Patrick O'Shaughnessy. I like the Indie Hackers podcast. I like the Farnham Street podcast. I like the All In podcast. Yeah, that's probably pretty much it.
Yeah, thanks for throwing those out. I always ask that because it's fun to see what other people are listening to and then actually go and listen to them. So I'll definitely check those out. Phil, we're kind of at that time. It's been about an hour. Can you maybe tell people where they can reach out if they're interested in getting in touch, and any plugs you want to throw out there?
Sure. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Phil Strazzulla with 2 Z's and 2 L's. I'm the only one out there. You can check out our website, selectsoftwarereviews.com, if you're looking to buy HR or you have really bad insomnia. And otherwise, LinkedIn is basically the best place if you want to like ask me a question or something like that. I do have a blog, philstrazzulla.com, that I write like once every 9 months about investing or entrepreneurship or whatever.
Okay. Very cool. Well, much appreciated, Phil. Yeah, no, this has been an awesome conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground. So I appreciate you taking the time to visit.
Thank you guys so much.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And see y'all next time.